It's my okay, recording in progress. It's my great pleasure to introduce our two fabulous speakers this evening. Let's get right to it. Our first speaker tonight is Josephine Wong. Josephine Wong, whose Chinese name is Wong Pui-hing, holds the position of professor and research chair in urban health at the Daphne Cockrell School of Nursing at Toronto Metropolitan University. She has extensive experience in critical public health, including the development of access and equity policies and inclusive practice frameworks. Her teaching and research focus on making visible historical and ongoing structural violence and systemic marginalization that reproduce avoidable social and health disparities. She works closely with systematically marginalized communities, including racialized immigrants, LGBTQ+ communities, and people experiencing stigma and discrimination. She is mindful about doing research with and not for the affected communities. She also seeks to answer the so what and what then questions in all of her research. Currently, she is co-leading multiple community-centered intervention studies to address stigma and discrimination, promote critical health literacy, and facilitate collective empowerment in Asian, Black, Latinx, and Middle Eastern communities in Canada, as well as among university students in China and women in India. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you.
And I think we will introduce Harry properly when we get to Harry's presentation, so then it's fresh in people's minds before the content. Yeah, so I will pass the floor now to Josephine. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Ambrose, and thank you, Alex, for inviting me to have the opportunity to come here and share ideas with everybody. I'm going to share my screen just to talk about acceptance and commitment to empowerment. And I'll just test it. The slide should move now. This is a model that we can take years to study, or we can take a short time, like this evening, to do an introduction about it. Are you able to see the second slide? Great. So what is acceptance and commitment to empowerment model? This is actually a model that we had refined and developed over the past 15 years. It first started with a research study that actually looked at how to address stigma in the HIV-affected communities. And Kenneth Poon was actually one of the research associates with us. And the results were so effective that we've proven that it actually really worked, so that we were able to actually work with 5 agencies in the community and secure funding to carry out the Champs in Action. So I want to take this opportunity to really thank all my colleagues and everyone that have been contributed to this process. And the model came about because when we went to the communities and talked to people living with HIV and service providers, we first asked them, choose one model. So we were showing 5 kinds of things that we can do. And the participant in the forum and say, no, we don't want to choose one. We want to choose 2. And by listening to the participant in the forum, we chose ACT and we chose empowerment. And it turned out to be that when we listen to people who are affected by the issue, then the powerful model actually come about. So the ACE model is really an integrated model of the acceptance and commitment therapy, as well as the group empowerment and mobilization model. So I'll first talk a bit about acceptance and commitment therapy. This is a third wave psychotherapy that has become increasingly acknowledged to be something that is very effective. It is a mindfulness-based approach that helps to increase our psychological flexibility. And the three key ideas is really about accepting our thoughts and feelings, so our internal struggles, including those that we are uncomfortable with or we don't really want to think about it or get in contact with it. Then it's about choosing direction, focusing on what really matters. And then when we know what really matters in life and in what we need to do, then we can't just stop at that. We will take action to realize the value living goals that we have. And then the group empowerment and mobilization approach is really about collective empowerment based on critical consciousness. So we draw a lot from Paulo Freire's work on critical pedagogy, and it is really about shared leadership and capacity building so that it's contributing to equity and social justice. And as you can see in this picture that I put here, that each one of us can go through processes that enable us to become psychologically flexible. But when we are together, then we are able to actually blossom and we become seeds that we can spread around, and then we become a field of flowers. And there's so much more power to change the world when we actually work together. So then I'll take some time to talk about the ACE processes that will promote psychological flexibility. Here is a diagram that I want to show you. So you see that all the lines are actually connected. So when we talk about the 6 processes of the ACT therapy and how they actually function together to enable us to become more flexible. When we are psychologically more flexible, then we are actually better able to actually follow our dreams and goals instead of getting stuck. So the first process I want to talk about is about diffusion. And if I ask you, and you don't have to answer, that as you enter into this room and as you were listening to Alex and Ambrose talking about tonight's event, were you really paying attention to everything that they were saying? Or were you aware that every so often your mind had actually drifted to something else? There might be certain words that we talk about that suddenly your attention is drawn to that. And that is very common. It happened to all of us all the time. Except sometimes when we hear certain words, it might remind us of certain stories and ideas that actually take us away in such a way that actually would take away our freedom to be who we are. So very often, for instance, I want to tell you a story when I used to work in a sexual health clinic. And I was working for public health. And once I was in counseling with a young woman, and she came in and we talked, and she actually had contracted herpes, and she came in to check for other sexually transmitted infection. And when we were talking, she was in tears. And she started talking about her relationship with her boyfriend at the time. And it sounds like it wasn't really a relationship that is safe or loving or supportive. And so she was a teenager. So I asked her, so since you are telling me all this about your boyfriend, what makes you stay with him? And her answer was that now that she had herpes, nobody would ever want her, and that she might as well just stick with this boyfriend. That is actually an example of fusion when we had certain ideas, stories, or discourses that we heard in society, and we started to believe that and allow those ideas and stories and rules to take hold of us. So then in ACT, we do experiential exercise so that we can actually let go. So very much like the hand here, that sometimes we're very stuck and we go through all kinds of struggle and suffering. but we just open up and let go a little bit, then we allow rooms to actually open up, to move on and experience life differently. So then the next concept is about acceptance. And I talked a little bit about that already. And as you can see from the hand here, acceptance is really about how do I accept the internal struggle that I go through? How do I have the wisdom to know that there are certain things that I can change, but there are certain things that I cannot change? And if I am aware that what I'm struggling are actually certain emotions, ideas based on my past experience, and when I come to accept that, yes, I'm experiencing that, I'm feeling it that way, but that's okay, and those are just thoughts, then I would open up the space. The one thing that I want to emphasize is that very often when we talk about this model about acceptance, there is a confusion that we're talking about acceptance of unfairness, injustices. It's not. It's really about accepting that I am going through certain emotional, internal struggles. And those are ideas and thoughts and emotions. And when I come to embrace that and befriend them, whether it's about anxiety or fear, then I actually have more energy to go and actually work towards fighting injustices. So another concept that is very helpful in the model is actually connecting to the present moment. So as I was talking to you before, if you think about since you've entered this virtual space, has your thought actually gone elsewhere? Wondering about, oh, that's something that I didn't do at work and I must get it done. Or that if you hadn't had dinner, you say, oh, I wonder when this is over. Can I turn off the screen and then I go and eat? Oh, I'm so hungry. Oh, what should I eat tomorrow? Or that, whoa, the weekend is coming. I wonder if so-and-so is going to meet me for coffee. So that happens all the time. And it's very common. But what we would like to do in this model is actually encourage all of us to actually get connected with the present moment through mindfulness practice. And the mindful practice is actually based on a lot of philosophy that actually has started in Asia and South Asia. And I love this model because I am claiming back some of the cultural roots and wisdom. And on top of that, I find that when I practice mindfulness, it enables me to deal with emotions in a way that is calm so that I don't react in such a way and behave in such a way that I might regret because I actually hurt someone. And I am able to actually see things more clearly. And if we think about life, there is really no moment in life that we are truly living except the present moment, because the future has not come. What had happened in the past had passed, but it's only this moment. So I constantly, very often remind myself, but I'm just like most of us, that I'm working, there's deadline to meet, but I find that coming back to me and my home is actually giving me a lot of strength to continue to actually do what I really want to do based on my values. So then another concept is actually self as context. This is actually one of the most challenging process to explain, because very often if we think about our identities, we belong to certain identities or community because it gives us a sense of belonging. At the same time, identities are imposed on us. And when that happens, we might hold on to those imposed identities and become very stuck. So because I work in the HIV field for many years now, for example, people living with HIV, when I first meet them and when we first start doing programming, many of them only think about their identity as someone living with HIV. But each of us are so much more than that. But to understand that part is really hard. So this diagram for you to see, those are actually my hand. What we invite you to see is that you are actually the holder of your experience. So your experiences is like the fist that is on top of your other hand. and they are not you. They were the past, they were experiences, they were stories that you embody. But who you are is actually the holder of those experiences. And so to help us to understand that, I found a beautiful picture. And so I want to share this with you. And I want you to think about, if you are a tree, which tree are you? So you look at these 4 trees, they're exactly the same tree, except it's the tree that is actually going through the 4 seasons, and therefore they look different. They are different. And, you know, by the time you get to the fall, many of your leaves have started falling down. And yet, is that tree the same tree? So this part is, I hope that this picture actually support you to think about it, that, you know, as a being, we're constantly changing. We have all kinds of different experiences. And yet there's a core of me that is always me, which is beyond my name, beyond my identity. Because if I hold on to my identity as a teacher, what happened when I retire? Do I suddenly become a nobody? And really enjoy my context, being a tree through the season, interacting with the world, interacting with all the elements. And that's how all those experiences come about. And I'll talk a bit about more when I go into the empowerment part, is looking at how we are actually totally connected to each other and to the environment and to everything else. So then the other concept that is very important in the model is actually about values. Values is about what really matters to me. And when I found something that really matters to me, how do I hold on to those values and ground me in what I do? Now, of course, we can go through all this and say that, oh, yes, I value social justice. I value that all children need to be loved and be cared for and have a, you know, good environment and be able to blossom. But then if I just sit on the couch and do nothing, then nothing actually would work. So the model is really about going through all the processes. When we become flexible, we can let go of some of those stories and let go of those discourses and things that are misconceptions. Then we can come to a part where we connect with what really matters. And then we need to do committed action in order to really truly live a life that is based on that. So then this is a short video that I'm not going to show because of time constraint, but you can type in that in YouTube and you find that this is an amazing, amazing video that you will really enjoy, and it really give us a sense of what it means to accept. So then the second part is really the empowerment and mobilization part. And when we first went through the CHAM study, what we found was that because we had 3 groups, one group only took ACT as an intervention, one group only took empowerment education as the intervention, and then we had a group that actually went through both. And we found out that participants that went through both actually became very powerful, the results, because when they become psychologically flexible and they were also able to engage in learning and experiential activities that enable them to see the structural influences of what happened in our life. They gathered together and they support each other, and they actually went out and do activities. We had 62 people who graduated from that program. And 9 months after the program was over, we invite them back to do focus group, and each month they were filling in activity logs. And the participants, 62 participants, had actually carried out more than 1,000 activities to address stigma at the personal level, so that they really engage in self-care. And then at the immediate social circle level, where they support each other, they support their families. Then many of them also act in the communities, doing workshop, and some of them actually go to the structural level, where they were coming out and protesting against, you know, take the idea about taking about healthcare away from refugees and people who are vulnerable. So then, as you can see here, we embedded the ACT therapy inside the social justice model. And you see here that the value that we feel had to be explicit, because in the West, when mindfulness or mindfulness-based practices are being propagated everywhere and promoted, very often is done in a way that there's no value attached to it. But when we think about how mindfulness and all those practices came about before, is actually grounded in certain values that is quite universal. So one is interdependence, that none of us actually could survive without each other. And every single action that I do actually will influence you in ways that is either positive or negative. The collective empowerment is actually very important in a sense that if we don't have collective empowerment, what we find is that people become flexible, they feel much better, but then when they live in isolation and when they're on their own, it's very hard to sustain that resilience and that positive living or the power to actually deal with all the challenges in their life. Social justice and equity is something that has always existed throughout different cultures across thousands of years, and is now we're living in a day and age where capitalism had taken over as the only value out there, that all the more reason we have to really bring that back. And empathy and compassion is also very important. We wouldn't be able to do diffusion or acceptance if we are actually not empathetic towards ourselves and also towards each other. And the kind of learning that we do within this model is actually using experiential learning, collaborative learning, taking the wisdom from each other. So there's not one person that had more knowledge or the other has superior knowledge. It's really about sharing the lived experience. And then we critically reflect on those experiences and come up with the understanding about where are the challenges and how come some people can live in a way that actually promote their health, and how come some people are constantly encountering gender-based violence, inequities. And so the critical dialogue is really about everyone getting together, and in talking, we're actually able to see more than what we usually see on our own, and that is understanding policies and discourses and what is happening in the media that actually affect all of our well-being. And so I hope I'm on time. I always worry I don't do things on time, because I always have to remind my student, if you need a break, put up your hand, because once I start talking, I don't stop.
Thank you so much, Josephine. So now we have time for comments, questions from everyone in the room tonight. As Alex said, this event is being recorded. So if you want to stay anonymous, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to post your comment or your question, and we will read it out without using your name. You can also send a direct message to me in the chat. If you do feel comfortable, you can use the raise your hand feature in chat, and then I will call on you by name, and you can speak your comment and your question. Okay. While people are thinking of their questions, I have a question, Josephine. You've given us a really good overview of the model. I'm wondering, can you walk us through what the experience is like of doing an ACE program? And I apologize if I'm not using the right word, if it should not be described as a program. So what I mean is, how long does it take? Is there a set number of sessions? How long are they? How many people will there be? What's a typical session? What are the activities? What's the experience of doing this, of doing ACE?
Yeah, thank you. That is a really great question. Prior to the pandemic, we were doing it in person. And so we were having actually, like 2.5 to 3 hours per session. and there'll be 6 sessions. So the 6 sessions are organized in such a way that every session will have components that deal with one of the ACT processes and also empowerment, so that we always do exercise. For instance, there's one exercise that we invite, I can do it right now with you. I invite you to think about what is the first thing that you've done since you got up this morning? What is one thing, ordinary thing that you've done since you got up this morning? So any brave soul to share? Yes, Harry.
I can share. This morning I woke up and I I brushed my teeth.
Yes. So ordinary things like brushing our teeth, right? So there are multiple ways that we can actually talk about brushing our teeth. We invite our participant after they come into the program that when they go home that day and they brush their teeth, try to brush their teeth mindfully. Experience what it tastes like. And some of the participants came back and say, I never knew that's what toothpaste tastes like. And we invite them to actually do it in such a way so mindful that they can actually experience the entire thing. And many of them come back with sensation, noticing sensation that they didn't before. In the empowerment part, we still pull onto, Harry brushed his teeth. So we ask, for you to brush your teeth, what did you need? So yes, Henry, so for you to brush your teeth, what did you need?
I needed a toothbrush, toothpaste. I needed myself to get myself to do it.
Yes. So then we already started to see that, your toothbrush, who made the toothbrush, where the material come from. And if people practice mindful eating, is the same. And we actually have exercise where we engage participant in eating mindfully. So whether it is, a piece of raisin, and we engage in such a way that participant had never noticed what a raisin looks like, and participant had never heard the sound of a raisin, but we do it in such a way that they actually could hear the raisin. And ultimately, we were encouraging everyone to actually think about, even just about toothbrush, how many people are actually connected to it. And you wouldn't be able to brush your teeth without water, then who's actually bringing you safe water? And we talk about those structural issues. I don't know how many of you have watched the news, and I almost just fainted yesterday when I heard on the news that Ontario government is thinking about deleting some of the water testing services in Ontario again. And we had Walkerton that happened, 15, 20 years ago. So then we engage everybody to think about that policy decision actually does affect all of us. And we're all interconnected. And Harry would not be able to brush your teeth safely if you don't have safe water. And the factory workers that actually produce your toothbrush, your toothpaste. And when we think about it that way, we had more empathy and compassion to make sure that these workers are also being treated well. And that's how we can actually work on the interconnection. I don't know whether that answered your question. So Ambrose is actually quite fun. Oh, but then since the pandemic, we worked so hard during the pandemic and turned everything online. And as a matter of fact, we will be launching the online training in Alberta and in Ontario in sometime in May. And our staff are actually going through the training. So one of the group will be the Greater Toronto Area. So if you know of anyone that fit into the criteria and want to come through this program, you're welcome to do that.
Thank you, Josephine. And if we have links to share, we can certainly share that with all the attendees tonight. I put in a link to the video on YouTube, and we can also share any registration links to sign up and learn more about. Are there any other questions or comments that people are thinking of? You can use the Q&A, use the chat, raise your hand. We're doing very well for time, so. Josephine, a couple of things really jumped out at me as you were speaking. Number one, you mentioned something about mindfulness practices based in certain cultural traditions, and what that sparked in my mind was how we in this society often talk about mindfulness and meditation, and it's packaged up in a non-racial way. It's kind of divorced from the history and where did it come from, and it's become this product, that people sell, and it's this white corporate thing. And I'm curious as to when people are participants in ACE, and when you kind of unpack those practices and ideas, what are those discussions like? When you get to that point, like, are they, how do you bring that frame or that lens into it when you talk about it?
Yeah, so my colleague Kenneth Feng, who worked with me and Alan in developing these models, and Kenneth was actually the first one, in the Asian community to actually bring ACT into all the different programs. We have actually written a couple of chapters now in books that actually talk about the roots. And I think now, after some of us protested, that now there are more and more acknowledgement about mindfulness practice actually, came from Asia. And many of the people who practice mindfulness as their career now, some of them actually learned when they went to Asia and do that. And I think for us, one of the challenge that is mindfulness is very different from a relaxation technique. When we do mindfulness without, getting back to the roots of the compassion, the clarity, the wisdom, and we only do it as a way to relax, then in effect is actually not really practicing mindfulness. Now, in the last 30, 50 years, many of the Zen Buddha's teachers and monks had actually made mindfulness very simple, because ultimately the wisdom is about how do I get connected to the moment here and now. And there's a lot of myth to think that mindfulness is about sitting on a cushion, to close your eyes, to empty your mind, which is impossible. We can't empty our mind. It's really about having the awareness that I'm having thoughts that coming through my mind, and that is already being mindful. And the other part is actually to be mindful almost at every moment. And nowadays we are on pilot, autopilot mode, especially since cell phones, young people, no matter how young you are nowadays, you have access so that you're constantly being called. You constantly, people are asking you about certain things. You're constantly being bombarded with messages. And mindfulness is actually about coming home within ourselves. And so in that way, we can really practice mindfulness without also embracing some of those values about compassion. Because how do we become mindful and yet still be hostile and violent towards others? So mindfulness is really about experiencing everything. And in some of the Zen Buddha's teaching, one of my teacher that I read a lot of his book and really listen to a lot his lecture is the Zen Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. And he's passed away, but his lectures are really amazing. And he really talked about this is about our mind. So in the last 2 decades, like since the Dalai Lama had also, practiced mindfulness with scientists, and many of his, disciples or students had gone into this neuroscience. A lot of those research come out. But one key thing that I find very, very helpful for me, that was the teaching of Thich Nhat Hanh, is that we think about our mind and consciousness, then there is a level of consciousness that we can go above. And within all of us, we have seeds. We have seeds that are positive. We have seeds that will bring happiness and calmness and compassion. There's seeds of anger and all that stuff. And being mindful is about constantly being aware of ourselves, which, part of which seeds are actually sprouting. And if I see that I have a lot of anger, mad, fear, anxiety, jealousy, those type of seeds are sprouting, then I practice mindfulness to actually befriend it and calm it down and actually water the seeds of compassion and happiness and caring about others. And this is a practice that we all have to do. But if we do it without values and without the idea that there has to be spiritual wisdom to tie to it, then we are actually only doing relaxation exercise. And that I can teach you too, since I'm a nurse. I can teach you deep breathing and, relaxation about your muscles and that kind of stuff. But mindfulness and the ACE model is actually about us getting together and also have a community to support each other, to dialogue and do things in such a way that it is really a growth. And for us, it's a spiritual growth, is a wisdom that we can rely on.
Thank you so much, Josephine. We do have one question that has come in, and we're doing okay for time, but we want to stay on time, so I will please ask you to keep your answer brief. And the question is this model portable? Can it be applied through self-practice on one's own?
Yes, it is portable in the sense that once you learn, a lot of the processes is actually something that, especially from actor, you can practice on your own. So for instance, a quick thing could be that I invite you right now, if there's something that really bothers you, for instance, if you say that, I just can't do well in my exam. But if I just ask you to say that I am aware, I have a thought that I cannot do well in the exam. When you practice saying that, compared to just saying that I can't do well in my exam, experience how you feel and see how that actually help you to diffuse. The only thing is that we can practice all this on our own and we might become better in certain way. It's truly works in a way that a lot of this practice have come from you. However, without the support of the community, and if we think that we can be independent, then that's when we don't know whether actually the effect would last, because it's really about getting together. And you don't have to come out to a program in ACAS for 10 years. It is really about getting together with friends who share similar kind of values and this practice, and you do it together as a small group, and it become a group of empowerment and support.
Thank you so much, Josephine. I'm going to throw a link into the chat for anyone who wants to learn more. Please click on that. And remember, we will have another Q&A at the end of the evening, so we can revisit questions for either of our speakers at that time. Thank you so much, Josephine. Now, let's hear from our second speaker of the evening. Thank you, Alex. Harry Au. Harry is a social who uses he and him pronouns, is a social worker and therapist who works with 1.5 and second generation Asian immigrants. He helps his clients go from feeling trapped to feeling self-liberated. Harry has a unique educational background in cultural anthropology, feminist studies, and social work. This pairs really well with his experience as an activist and community worker. These experiences allow Harry to have a unique approach to therapy and mental health to help his clients and himself unknot the tangled web of cultures, identities, oppressions, and traumas entrenched deep within us. When not doing therapy, you can find Harry trying to rekindle his love for sports and reading and trying to get better sleep. You can check out the links below for some mental health info. We can put that into the chat as well. We'll copy and paste and put that into the chat. And I also want to mention to all of you that we are especially happy that Harry could join us tonight because he was feeling a little unwell earlier this week. And it was a question, if he would be able to join us, and he is well enough, and we are so deeply grateful that he's making this effort to be here. And with that, welcome, Harry. Take it away.
Oh, I was on mute. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Ambrose, for that introduction. And thank you for ACAS for having me today. Yeah, and I was very excited to come chat with the group here because I in the past I've actually gone to a few ACAS events, and it's really nice to be reconnected with ACAS. And when Josephine was talking, I think I was actually one of the participants in one of the groups for ACE. It was led by Professor Rick Sin, so it was really nice for Josephine to really refresh me with all the things I learned. So thank you, Josephine, for that. Yeah, and and yes, so today I'm going to be talking about Asian mental health and specifically relating to 1.5 and second generation Asian immigrants. But I do want to start off by saying that and making a quick caveat that 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 Asian identities are super diverse. All of our experiences are super duper different. Even if we're from the same culture, we take on the culture differently. We value certain aspects of it more than another aspect of it, and every family and every individual will be different. And then on top of that, we we also we also now have a second culture that's coming in where wherever we have moved and immigrated to. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Um, and and I also want to acknowledge that there's often the discourse around mental health stigma in Asian communities. And I'm always very careful when I talk about it. Because in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, every community has a level of stigma with mental health, including the Western world, right, where we've seen the history of psychology and psychiatry being rooted in a history of that stigma, with shock therapy and gender identity disorder, and I believe homosexuality was also a mental disorder. So there were a lot of stigma and a lot of problems within it. So how I understand the emphasis of mental health stigma in Asian community is that this narrative is very common because it hides the fact that a lot of our challenges also is rooted in racism. And if white supremacy can really say, hey, you know what? You guys just stigmatize mental health, so everything is your fault, then they can blame it on us and stigmatize our communities rather than really acknowledge the fact that racism plays a huge part in our mental health in within Asian communities. So I just want to make these two kind of caveats just to talk a little bit about that. But I do want to start off in talking about Asian mental health with a completely fictional person called Jenny. And this is a person that I kind of created from a lot of different clients that I've had in the past, also a little bit of my own experience, and also just some added details. So Jenny is a 6-year-old Asian immigrant to Canada. Um, and this is a strange new land. She came here with her family, with her parents, and decided that to make their home to Canada. And and as she came here and enrolled in a school, one day where her mom dropped her off, she went and spoke with her friends at the school. And then her friends started making fun of her mom, saying that, why is she speaking some weird language that we don't understand? Why is she dressed so weirdly? So Jenny gets really mad. And Jenny goes home and she tells her mom. And after she told her mom what her friends had said to her, she could see the hurt in her mom's eyes. And from that moment, Jenny realized that, oh, I don't want to hurt my mom by telling her these things. So I'm gonna have to deal with these bullies myself because I don't want to see my mom hurt like that. Now a few years passes, and Jenny is now age 8, and she has a parent-teacher night. And because her parents don't speak English, she is kind of tasked with having to translate between the teacher and her parents, which at age 8 is a huge responsibility that she has to take on. So so if she has a good teacher, her teacher might be very patient. Or if she has a bad teacher who might also be a racist, that teacher might be super disrespectful to her parents. And Jenny has to kind of figure out in that moment, what do I do with my teacher's racism towards my mom? She might not even be able to identify it as racism, but she knows that this is aggression, a certain level of aggression and shame that she might be feeling. So now at age 12, she's now having to take care of her siblings and help her parents while her parents work. She doesn't understand much about money, but she just knows that her family don't seem to have enough of it. And a lot of times when she's sitting with her siblings watching TV, she could hear her parents yelling at each other in the background. And she thinks that maybe she saw her dad hit her mom once, but she's not completely sure. By age 17, Jenny is tasked with this immense pressure to be a straight A student. She knows her parents wants her to be a doctor, and she also knows that she has to help out with a lot of things at home. For example, any governmental letters that her parents receive, she's gonna have to read them and reply to them. And at this point, she's very aware that her dad is abusive to her mom, and that her mom depends on her for support. And on top of that, she's dating now, but she has to hide it from her parents because her parents are not okay with that. Now, and by now at age 22, Jenny's an adult, but she's just really sick and tired of life. She doesn't want to go to med school, and that makes her feel a lot of shame. And she really doesn't know what to do about it, so she just feels really depressed. And she feels like no one really understands her and really sees her for who she is. And the worst part is she doesn't really know who she is and who she wants to be. But she just knows that she's miserable. And on top of that, she's now questioning her own gender and sexuality. But she's terrified of what that might mean for her relationships with her family. And I think in Jenny's story, maybe not all of these aspects you can relate to, but I think perhaps some of these things you might be able to relate to. And I want to take a look at how all of these, how Jenny's upbringing really impacted the way she grew into an adult and impacted the way that she became a person. And the first thing that really comes to my mind is she's a parentified child. So what that means is that a parentified child is a child who's kind of forced to grow up too quickly. So in a healthy parent-child relationship, parents are able to provide unconditional love and support for the child. And that the parents are able to provide the child with an environment to learn and grow in a safe way. However, um, when there are times where some parents may not be able to do that, whether it is circumstances in their life like immigration or racism that can make things harder, or perhaps the parents just having a hard time providing that kind of unconditional love for them because perhaps their parents were never able to provide them for that. So in these cases, when the child is forced to take on too much, like taking care of their parents or having to take care of a lot of things around the household at a very early age, um, it leads to a child becoming parentified. So in Jenny's case, we could see it from the very beginning that she felt like she had to protect her mom from what her bullies were saying to her. She felt like she had to do the translation between her teacher and her parents, and also take care of her parents, and helping with the governmental letters that she had to reply. And also having to support her mom in the relationship where the dad is abusive. So what can be really challenging is that when you're a parentified child, you grow up feeling like love is conditional. You have to do the things that that make the other person happy for you to feel loved. Because a lot of times when you're not doing these things and you're not helping out, you might be shamed for it. You might be told, you're selfish or you're not being mature. Um, and it's really challenging because your relationships with the people that you have in the future after you've grown up is that you will still feel like love is conditional, and you will still feel like I need to do things for other people in order for them to love me. And this moves on to the second thing that might develop for Jenny, which is codependency. So when you're codependent, what that means is that your self-worth is kind of based on your ability to take care of other people's needs. And you kind of believe that um, if you do this good enough, then the other person will love you back, and which will make you feel loved, and which will make you feel like you're good and a lovable person. A person who isn't codependent has a healthy sense of self, meaning that they don't need to constantly prove their self-worth. They don't need to prove that they're lovable because they already feel that they are lovable and that they feel secure about who they are. But for a person who is codependent, their self-worth is so tied to being able to take care of other people's needs and making them happy so that they can in turn reciprocate that to them and show them that, hey, I love you back too, because you can provide needs for me. And what happens is that a lot of times the codependent person ends up ignoring their own needs, um, and instead just focuses on the other person's needs. So in Jenny's case, she grew up kind of constantly having to prioritize other people's needs, whether it's taking care of her mom, helping out in the family, taking care of her siblings. She constantly had to take care of other people's needs and prioritize that over hers. And even with her career, feeling like she has to be a doctor not because she wanted to be one, but because her family wanted to be one. Feeling like she couldn't explore her gender and sexuality and being afraid of it because it might bring shame to the family. And these are the implicit and explicit messages that Jenny has received, that her needs are perhaps not as important as the family's needs. And she learns that she will only be shown love and affection when she's able to help out with the family and prioritize the family's needs over her own. And this can be very damaging when we grow up into adults because as I mentioned before, this will be the kind of same kind of relationship that she will be pursuing in the future with potential partners, with friendships, and it can really open her up to possible abuse in the future. I want to talk a little bit about emotionally immature parents as well. Um, so um, the idea of an emotionally immature parent is when a parent is not really able to regulate their own emotions. They and a lot of times they might not be even able to identify what they're feeling and being aware that they're even feeling an emotion. And a lot of times they just kind of react. And as a result of that, a lot of times the way they respond to you is based on meeting their own emotional needs and and not really you're thinking about what the emotional needs of the child is all the time. So so I can give an example of that. So for example, let's say Jenny's mom is not able to handle her own anger towards Jenny's dad. So she dumps all of her emotions onto Jenny by telling her and complaining to her everything about the dad. And as we discussed earlier, this contributes to Jenny being a parentified child and having to be an emotional support for her mom. Um, where Jenny's mom really isn't able to identify her own anger and really handle it herself. And then in the next instance, where Jenny's trying to tell her mom that, hey, you know what? When you tell me all these things, it really makes me anxious to listen to you tell me about your relationship with your husband. And that what happens is in that immediate moment, once Jenny said that to her mom might be feeling shame, right? Feeling ashamed that, oh, maybe I've hurt my daughter, maybe I'm not a good mom. And a lot of times that shame might be repackaged into anger. And in that anger, Jenny's mom might say to her, you know what, you're a bad daughter. You're supposed to support me as a daughter. And again, a lot of times what happens is that the parent might center how they feel over the child's feeling. Not really consciously thinking about it, but because they may not have the skills to be able to recognize their own emotions and to be able to regulate it on their own. So they a lot of times might involve other people within their regulation, which is, talking to Jenny to get her to help her regulate her own emotions. And I also want to talk about from the parents' perspective too, how there might be a lot of intergenerational trauma that they may have received that's actually being passed on to Jenny. So with parents being emotionally immature, a lot of times it's probably because they learned it from their parents. We know that with emotional regulation, with understanding emotions, it's a skill that we need to learn. And if our parents um, don't have that skill, a lot of times it's because their parents never taught it to them. So they were never able to be able to have those skills to teach it to their children. So 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 other forms of intergenerational trauma might also be that, our parents, Jenny's parents, might have experienced abuse in their own family, whether it is emotional or physical. And our parents might also have faced different traumas like war traumas or extreme poverty. And even just um, being immigrants comes with a lot of trauma, like coming here and experiencing racism and discrimination, being underemployed or not being able to find a job, not speaking the language, lacking social support and not having new support or finding a new support system here. Or perhaps, um, there might be abuse within the family or that the relatives might be abusive towards them. And on top of that, there's now multiple patriarchies that we got to deal with our home culture patriarchy and then also now Western patriarchy, which actually complicates things even more. So it is really important to actually understand some of this family history and intergenerational trauma because it can really help us to move from the anger, blame, and shame that we might feel, and it help us move towards accepting the things that had happened to us and also the decisions that we need to make for ourselves that can help us heal. And I also want to talk about the idea of filial piety and shame. So filial piety is and I think maybe some of you might have heard this term before, but once I explain it, I think a lot of you may really connect and understand it. Um, it has its roots in Confucianism, and it's kind of a guideline of how children should love and respect their parents and elders. It's almost like this obligation that we have as children towards our parents. Um, and how this plays out is that from a very early age, basically since we're born, we're kind of taught this idea of filial piety. And it's so ingrained in us that we don't even think about it. We just do it. We just know that we have certain obligations to our parents, whether it is taking care of them, their needs, or being respectful to them in a specific way. Um, we just know that we need to do it. And if we fail at it, there's extreme shame that we feel because our whole life is being taught to us that to be a good and proper child, you need to be able to fulfill these obligations. And I don't think that filial piety is always bad because I think it could be great if you grew up in a healthy, loving home. But the question is, what happens if you didn't? What happens when filial piety comes at the expense of your own happiness? What if your parents have been harmful to you? Or what happens if we were passed down intergenerational trauma? So when these things happen, the impact of filial piety oftentimes will create a lot of internal conflict. On one hand, we want to love and respect our parents. But on another hand, we are angry, sad, and frustrated at how our parents may have treated us. We want to love them, and we do love them. But also at the same time, there are parts of us that want to say, go to hell. I don't want anything to do with you. And that can be really challenging. That inner conflict can be really challenging. And this inner turmoil is really painful to reconcile. And even with a lot of my clients that I've seen, uh, before they started seeing me, they've actually stayed stagnant for many, many years because it's so scary to have to reconcile the fact that, hey, maybe my relationship with my parents isn't as great as I had thought it was. Maybe I do need to make changes. Maybe I do need to set boundaries. And because that comes with so much shame, it's really hard to really look into doing this work. And so a lot of times a lot of clients that come to me, um, they kind of hit that road of, I think I really, really have to change. Um, um, and feel that they can't just put it off anymore. But it's really difficult. So these are some of the things that are very common in Asian clients I work with. And even if you don't plan to pursue therapy, I think knowing these things can be very helpful because it really helps you understand why you're feeling a certain way, and it can help you make different decisions for yourself. But yeah, so thank you for listening in today, and I hope some of this information has been relevant to you. And I think we can move on to like some questions.
Thank you, Harry. Wow, there is so much in there that we can engage with, and once again, we invite everyone to share their questions and their comments. You can do it by Q&A in the chat, or raise your hand and you can speak your question. While people are formulating their questions, I have a lot of thoughts, but one thing that I'll throw out there, Harry, I'll play devil's advocate for a moment,
Mhm.
and I'll throw something at you that I imagine you have heard before. And it goes something like, Harry, you're talking about all this stuff, but this is just our culture. Parentifying, like parentified, intergenerational trauma, like this is how our people have survived for decades. We're about the collective, we're about respect for our elders. These are good things, good qualities that we're valorized for. And if you want to talk about trauma, like our histories are full of that. We don't have to go back far into history to find hunger, war, like all kinds of crazy things that people live through with it happened within our lifetime. So what you're talking about, like this is just our culture. You are pathologizing Asian cultures. You're pathologizing our ways of being and our histories. What's the line between trauma and culture? And like, what are you talking about? I imagine you've heard this line of questioning before.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think the thing is the Asians who have learned the skills around, emotional regulation, um, and have really great relationships with their parents don't end up in my therapy room, right? They're the ones that have grown up in a very healthy and safe home, and won't be in the therapy room. And I don't think that um, all Asians experience this kind of trauma. And I also think that when we think about culture, culture is constantly changing and shifting. And I think a lot of times we end up thinking about culture as like, this thing that has this huge impact on us and dictates how we live, right? But that's just not the right way to look at it. Culture is kind of this thing where we, as people within that culture, constantly reproduces. So everything that we do, so what happens is, as a person, we get taught the culture, but then also the culture only reproduces itself when we constantly kind of perform it, right? So let's say there's a tradition that we have. If everybody stopped doing this tradition no longer exists, and 200 years from now, people may not even remember it, right? So culture throughout the years and decades and centuries has always been changing, and especially now in such a global world where a lot of cultures are kind of mixing together and taking ideas from each other, which also existed in the past, right? um Different cultures and different civilizations always taken ideas from each other all the time. That I think things might be shifting. um and um and uh I think it's really important to look at culture as not this fixed thing, but as a very fluid thing, and that we all practice the culture very differently. And me compared to another Chinese person may understand Chinese culture completely differently and may practice it very, very differently.
Thank you, Harry. Okay, so we have a question that's come up in the chat, and I will read it. I'm not of Asian background, but as a minority, I can relate so much to Jenny. I think minorities in general share this unfortunate trauma. What made you decide to focus on the Asian community when it comes to your therapy practice?
Yeah. I think so. I think when I first started, I was focused on BIPOC. I was focused on BIPOC population. And I think that I was this is actually my own fear. My own fear was, what if I couldn't get enough clients to fill out my practice? Because there's a very real thing with running your own therapy clinic, with actually having to make enough to survive, right? And what really happened was during COVID-19 lockdown, with a lot of the violence against the Asian community, um, that for me really solidified my decision to work specifically with Asians. Because I thought to myself, you know what, screw it. This is the population that I want to work with. These are the people that I want to work with, and I need to follow my heart. I need to follow my heart and work with the people that I need to work with, that I want to work with. So that's how I came down to the decision to work with specifically Asians in my practice.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you for that question. So if there's more than one person in this room tonight who can relate to the scenario of Jenny, which is so well crafted, and there are so many things in there that we could talk about. What do people do? And what if people can relate to the scenario, but maybe they don't quite know how to put themselves in the frame of mental health because they are surrounded by markers of success in this system, right? Maybe they have a successful career and they can manage all this stuff, but and yet they can relate to a lot of what you're saying, um, and they're not sure, like is this something that belongs to me? Mental health. I'm not psychotic, you know, and like, is this really, does this really apply to me? And if people have those questions, is this connected to me, like to my life experience? What should people do if they're asking those questions and those connections are resonating in people's minds? Can you hear me, Harry?
Yes, yes. Oh, is that question for me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah. I don't think everybody needs to go into therapy, for sure. And I don't think that in this fictional character of Jenny that everybody may relate to, or may feel like there's commonalities to. But I do think that, if there are things that we struggle with, therapy could be an option. uh, Looking into mental health could be an option. And I also am a proponent of, we can always learn a little bit more about our mental health. We can always improve our mental health, just like how we see a doctor check up every year, or just see a doctor just to make sure everything is good whenever we're worried a little bit about our health. That for me is kind of like how mental health is. Maybe you want to do a checkup. Maybe there are certain things that you're struggling with in the moment, that you can go speak to a therapist with, or discuss things with a mental health professional with. I've even had somebody who reached out to me to talk to me to prepare for getting married. because he knows that his life's going to be very different once he's married. So he just wanted to check in to make sure he's at his best, to be able to prepare for being married and having a partnership. So I think these things are great where it's really just seeing a therapist as a resource, as a tool that can help you in certain moments to kind of best prepare you for certain stages or phases or seasons in your life.
Thank you, Harry. We still have about 10 minutes left, and not seeing any more questions or comments coming up. I wonder, there's there is a connection that I would like to try to make and invite your thoughts on, Josephine and Harry. What you talked early on in your presentation, Harry, about stigma, and one of the stereotypes that Asian communities face is, that the idea that we work, 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 and we're like drones. We don't have creativity, we don't have leadership skills, we're not sexual beings, we don't know how to have fun, we don't have humanity, right? Like we're not humans, we're like these machines that produce. And that connects to a word that Josephine used during her presentation, which is capitalism, which is something that we don't often talk about in mental health, right? Somehow the conditions that produce illness in a capitalist system, like sometimes we talk about it in a way that's divorced. If you're ill, well, you go to our employee assistance portal and you can talk to someone for 20 minutes and they give you some phone numbers. You can do a CPD group for 8 weeks because that's funded and it's easy to get funding for that. But like the reason why you may be ill under the system that we live in, that these campaigns and resources are created, like let's not talk about that, right? Like we live in the system that drives us to produce under using these cultural narratives like the hardworking Asian, and yet these narratives deny us our identity beyond producing value for people who occupy higher spots in the hierarchy. So I'm really noticing, you're talking about stigma, you're talking about capitalism, but there are connections in that are not often uncovered in conversations about mental health, right? Like literally in the ACE model, you can do one component and the rest of it doesn't even exist. The social justice part doesn't even exist. I'm finding that really remarkable, these connections and these things that are being touched on tonight. I wonder what thoughts you have on that, or anyone else.
So I really appreciate the story that Harry you put together, right, based on your experience. And I think, because you use a social justice and critical analytical model in your counseling, I think even when people come through and understand where their suffering is coming from is very important. That might itself already be, a seed for liberation. And this is one of the reasons why we, did not want to only do ACT, right, which is the psychological therapy, but also tied to empowerment, which really focus on the social justice and collective capacity building. And I think a lot of the things that Harry you have described in your story is actually really tied to power relations, because we live in a society, whether it is hundreds of years ago in China or here now in a so-called multicultural society, but constantly children growing up in Canada are benchmarking themselves with other peers. And they see that how come my friends' parents don't treat them that way, so they already started to feel certain way. And the other part will be the kind of pressure that you talk about the parents undergoing. And you're so right when you said that not everybody needs therapy. We say the same thing, not everybody needs ACE. People need therapy and people need ACE when what they try to do in life is not working, when they are suffering so much that they are stuck. They're not able to actually live to their full potential. They're not able to actually step forward. So I really see a lot of that, because if we think about it, liberation could come when we actually start to develop that sense of compassion. So if I were Jenny, I'm confused, I am resentful, because how come I had to do all this since I was 8? And at the same time, I'm fearful, because what if this person that I'm developing a relationship, I'm doubting myself. Am I just doing this because they are like my parents, right? But if we apply the compassion part, the liberation will come in a sense that it's not about making excuses for abusive parents. It's about, I understand where they're coming from. I have compassion for them, so I don't have to get stuck there. But I also have compassion for me. I wasn't taken care of when I was a child. This is time for me to actually make decision, to set boundary, as you said. And I think that's, really powerful, setting the boundaries, and it doesn't always succeed. And so I think the ACE part, the psychological processes that was embedded in the empowerment, could be really powerful, because instead of falling into deep depression, it's okay for me to actually realize that I'm feeling really blue right now because I'm thinking about those things, but I recognize that those are thoughts. It doesn't define me, that I can actually continue to look at what's important to me. So the filial piety stuff, I think is true. Many Asian, Mexicans, like people from Portugal,
Yeah.
we all go through that. And as you said, it's actually a good value. It's a good value when everybody actually will treat each other with love and compassion, and not just about, I'm the parent. You know what? I brought you into this world. You have to listen to me. Because you also hear Canadian-born children telling their parents, their immigrant parents, well, I didn't tell you to give birth to me. You gave birth to me. You're responsible for me. So if we think about those type of argument, it's really based on that self-focus, but a lack of compassion towards each other. And I think if we can actually find the space to actually let go of some of those things and actually turn everything, if I look at it through a lens of compassion, what insight would I get? And then get back to the values, that I value my life. I might have been abused before, but I'm not going to accept any more abuse at this point. Then I'll be able to take action. So that's how, like, as I was listening to Harry, your story putting together, I was there thinking about, this process can work on that. That process can work on that. So it's really wonderful. And you were in Strength and Unity. That's why you had come through that
Yes, yes.
program. Yes. So I don't know, Ambrose, whether, it makes sense.
It does, because we use the word question, but it's not like question, answer, neat question, neat answer. This is really more of a conversation, and these forums are ongoing. And yeah, so thank you for that, Josephine. I guess what's really resonating with me at this point is, connections between family systems are related to other systems, right? Family systems do not exist in isolation from other systems. They're connected. And mental health, uh, health justice, and social justice, all those things are also related, right? Like these discussions are so complex. And thank you to you, Josephine. Thank you to Harry. Thank you to our speakers tonight for bringing us these wonderful presentations and for this conversation. Alex has put an evaluation link into the chat. Please it's very short. Please take the time to fill it out, because that helps us to know. Your feedback helps us to program for the future, and it helps us to get funding for more programs, and yeah, let us know what you want to see in the future. I think that, and Alex has something else that he would like to share with us.
Yes. So again, thank you for our amazing speaker. Thank you everyone for joining us. So the evaluation is on the chat box. We also have a free e-gift cards to give out, but unfortunately we have some technical difficulties. So we're not able to do it live. We're going to do it offline and we will contact the winners by email. So you will be notified if you win this e-gift card. But thank you again. And I think that's it from me.
Thank you for having me, and I hope that we'll be able to do more fun stuff like this in the future. That maybe get together in person and experience some of the fun.
Yes, we do a good mix of in-person and online events at ACAS because we recognize that not everybody is able to make it out, and not everybody lives in Toronto, you know. So we always do in-person and online events. I also threw my email address into the chat if anybody wants to send me like an extended feedback. It may be easier for you to do that by email than filling out the form. Yeah, thank you once again, Harry. Thank you, Josephine. Thank you, Alex. Thank you to everyone for sharing this time and this space with us tonight. And we will see you all next time. Good night,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Josephine, Harry. Thanks, everything.
Thank you, Kenneth. Save the links in the chat if you want to take advantage of them. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Take care.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you, Harry. Good night.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone. Okay, it's only me and Alex and Kenneth.
Yeah.
We can stop the recording.